Welcome to Tech Matters, Building a Digital Platform for Your Hospital at Home program, a webinar sponsored by the Hospital at Home Users Group, presented in partnership with the American Academy of Home Care Medicine and the American Hospital Association. We'd also like to recognize the generous support of the John A. Hartford Foundation for its support of the Users Group and this webinar series. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Dr. Bruce Leff. A member of the Hospital at Home Users Group leadership team, Dr. Leff has been a national leader of the hospital at home movement in the United States since the mid-1990s, when he helped pioneer the model at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Today, he is professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where he directs the Center for Transformative Geriatric Research. Among other responsibilities, he currently serves as the chair of the Geriatric Medicine Board of the American Board of Internal Medicine, and is the co-lead of the National Home-Based Primary Care and Palliative Care Learning Collaborative. Please take it away, Dr. Leff.
John, thanks a lot. It's great to be here. We have a tremendous webinar for you today, and just wanted to put a plug in for the Hospital at Home Users Group, and you see our URL there. You also see our Twitter handle. Briefly, the users group was formed about 18 months ago with support of the John A. Hartford Foundation. Started off as a group of operative hospital at home programs, that is, programs that had taken care of at least one person. We decided to get together to try and push the movement forward. We formed several working groups, including work groups on program standards, quality measures, and payment and regulatory issues, and those groups have been working to help hospital at home advance and scale over time. With the events associated with the CMS waiver, we've expanded the users group and welcome any and all interested to join the movement. You'll also find on the users group a lot of technical assistance resources, as well as recordings of our webinars and the like, and we'll share that information at the end of the webinar. Next. So this webinar, which is posted in green, sort of in the middle of the slide, Tech Matters, is the fourth in the series of webinars that the user group has been hosting. We had one that started off on the model itself and the waiver, had one on building support and issues in strategic engagement, and then the most recent one before today was on patient selection for hospital at home. We have 3 additional webinars coming up in this series. One next week, and in each of the successive 2 weeks, one on logistics and operations, one on ancillary services, and one on quality and safety. And if you go to the Hospital at Home Users Group.org site, at the TA Center, you can actually register for all of those webinars today if you like. Next. So Tech Matters, building the right digital platform for your hospital at home program. And I'd like to introduce, on the next slide, our 2 speakers today. So first we have Jared Conley, who's the Associate Director of the MGH Healthcare Transformation Lab and an instructor in emergency medicine at the Harvard Medical School. I've known Jared for a number of years. Brilliant guy who really helps lead in the hospital at home movement. He's a member of the hospital at home leadership team at the Massachusetts General Hospital and their physician technical advisor. And we also have David Levine, who's the medical director for strategy and innovation at the Brigham Health Home Hospital and an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. 2 great speakers today, highly qualified to talk about this topic. Gentlemen, take it away.
Excellent. Well, it's great to be with you all. We just have a disclosure slide here. And then here's the agenda. So we're going to start out by just doing a little intro about what we mean by the digital platform. And at that point, we'll get into some of the specifics around communication, monitoring, the EHR, and then the technological ecosystem. And then we'll get into the Q&A and have about 15 minutes for that at the end. So please, again, feel free to submit your questions. All right, so building the right digital platform to successfully launch your hospital at home program. It's not quite as dynamic and exciting as this, but you do definitely need a digital architecture to help support your program so that you can deliver the highest possible quality care to your patients in this unique area, right, which is acute care at home. I'd like to approach it from the jobs to be done framework, which many of you are likely familiar. This is an innovation theory that stems from the late Harvard business professor Clayton Christensen and others who helped us better understand what we, quote, hire products and services to do for us. In that framework, let's assess the key needs that we have in hospital at home that we might hire tech to do for us. First, a seamless communication between clinicians, patients, and staff. Second, transmission, monitoring, alerting of key physiologic metrics from off the patient's body to the clinician team so they can best deliver care. Documentation and billing of care. And then lastly, logistics management. Before we dive into each of these domains and how tech might be the solution, it's important to emphasize that hospital at home programs are very human-centric, with patients and caring clinicians at the core. As such, it is critical to recognize the strategic decisions that will have to be made to best configure your hospital at home program and know when an in-person encounter is best, or rather when a virtual care experience is more desirable. As you develop your unique hospital at home program, you'll likely get these human versus tech decisions mostly right initially. But be patient if you don't. It can be a bit like this Rubik's Cube, where you still haven't quite got it perfectly set up just yet. The first domain of building a digital platform is communication. How can technology provide and enhance seamless communication? Well, thank you, COVID-19. We've all learned how to do this much better. But patient-clinician communication in acute care at home is definitely unique and high stakes. Robust, secure, easily used channels of communication are crucial as we seek to mirror inpatient care. You'll want to engage early with your telehealth group, but be prepared to navigate the uniqueness of acute care at home. So what are some of these unique factors that are worth appreciating? Well, I've broken it down into patient population factors, clinician factors, and care model factors. Patient population. There's a geriatric bent to hospital at home care. Of course, the range is broad. At MGH, we've cared for people in their 20s up to certainly, I think, about 100. But the average age is in kind of the 70s and 80s. So as a result, tech literacy is unreliable at best. Think about helping your 80-year-old parent or grandparent get on Zoom recently. The home environment can also be a tech desert. A recent study by Ativ Malhotra at Harvard showed 26% of Medicare beneficiaries lacked digital access at home. And then when you go and try and deliver this care, even when it looks like they're set up for success, sometimes efficient digital care is still locked out by unknown Wi-Fi passwords. Clinician factors. Unlike inpatient and outpatient care, in hospital at home, clinicians are often on the go and sometimes might need to do a telemedicine visit from the car, parked, of course. There's also a diversity of devices that need to be used. You can't rely on hospital-provided desktops per se, and you'll need to think about the software working on clinicians' smartphones and tablets of all different generations, iPhone 12, Android, iPhone 7, etc. Care model factors. In hospital at home, you'll have to carefully consider when virtual versus in-person is the best form of acute care delivery. For instance, when is a virtual physical exam sufficient in acute care? There's also the possibility of both scheduled and unscheduled virtual visits, again, as it's acute care and things can change. And lastly, there's a potential for MD and APP to paramedic as a novel communication channel, unlike inpatient and outpatient care. Now that we've reviewed some of the unique aspects of telemedicine and hospital at home, let's explore a useful construct for navigating this care frontier. Building on the concept of the value compass from my colleagues at Dartmouth that some of you might know, my team and I have generated this hospital at home telemedicine compass. And it's essentially to help you understand how to best do telemedicine in this space. And we've broken it down kind of between clinical data retrieval, the home car environment, security and privacy, and tech literacy. So clinical data retrieval. When it comes to employing virtual visits, you'll want to understand the appropriate patient populations as well as the timing of such visits within the episode of care. All things are not alike when it comes to this work, and it's very important to do this work up front and also learn from your experiences. You'll also want to determine the appropriateness of audio versus video. We've often found in doing this work, sometimes that audio is okay, but video is actually very crucial for this type of acute care when you're looking, of course, for an exam, etc. And then you'll also want to train clinicians in acute care physical exams. This is not the same as a chronic type exam, and it can be very unique. There's a lot of good work in this space that's continuing to develop. Both you can find resources through the American Telemedicine Association, others. Jefferson has done a lot of good work in this space. So some things to look out there for. If we jump over to the home and car environment, I'd recommend generating some sort of home tech screening tool. There's this concept of kind of, I call it Wi-Fi genotype versus phenotype, right? Just because you might have Wi-Fi or you know what it's on, it doesn't mean it's reliable, and what that looks like actually in doing care cannot be the same. So the genotype phenotype thing is very, very important as you're doing this care. You want to assess the best location for a tablet if you're going to be placing that in the home, and you'll definitively want to test the connection before you leave the home. It's always the worst, of course, when you think you're set up for success, you go back to your office, your home, wherever you're doing the virtual visit from, and it's failed. You'll also want to develop video-based telemedicine solutions that function across the diversity of home and car environments. You want to consider, for those patients that don't have Wi-Fi, an LTE-enabled device, or potentially using a mobile hotspot, or if the Wi-Fi isn't strong, again, getting back to the phenotype, you'll want to use a Wi-Fi extender as an option. For security and privacy, again, the telemedicine group probably within your hospital or health system are experts in this space. You'll really want to work with them carefully around the cybersecurity issues, particularly as you're engaging with patients in their homes and the various Wi-Fi weaknesses that might be at play, but rely on your experts there. And then from the privacy side, if you are going to be putting a tablet in the home, you want to consider use of a webcam cover to maximize privacy within the home. Something that, again, when you're engaging in a video visit, you can just ask the patient to scroll and allow them to see you. Tech literacy, minimizing the maze to the digital front door. This has to do with minimizing all the clicks you have to get to enable that virtual visit to happen. So something that will allow your 80-year-old patient to just minimize that maze and just have a very seamless experience. And again, as the body ages, the ears, the eyes, they don't work as well. You'll want to, before you leave, you'll want to help them turn up the volume, the brightness, and allow for a better experience. And you also want to consider things like guided access mode. So for those that aren't familiar, guided access mode is particularly within the Apple devices, but it allows you to essentially lock a device in a particular app. And again, it helps to potentially minimize the maze. We use this in some of our work at MGH, and it's really minimized that maze and allowed that digital front door to be very front and center. I'm going to stop there and allow David to chime in if he has any thoughts on this particular space of clinician communication and patient communication.
Thanks, Jared. Really nice comments there. Jared and I are going to pass back and forth here. I think one piece I just wanted to add regarding kind of this telemedicine communication is, first of all, it's okay if you don't have experts at your institution in telemedicine, even if you don't even have a platform necessarily. And we realize that a lot of hospitals and systems may not have that expertise. And there's plenty of opportunities to kind of launch something like this without having that kind of expert backing. And the other pieces that I would put out there is really important to kind of go on some field trips around your geographic catchment area and test your communication. In our home hospital program, we bring LTE connected tablets to every single person's home. We don't rely on anyone's Wi-Fi or anything like that. But we have some, what I like to call iron curtains in Boston, and important to know where those are, because you may not be able to serve the patient the way you want to if we're not able to get connectivity. And I would just kind of go for a ride and make sure you can make video visits happen in different places across your catchment area. You'd be surprised, even if the Verizon or T-Mobile or AT&T or Sprint map says that there's 4 bars, 5 bars there, you'd be surprised sometimes what the facts are on the ground. We're going to move now to some of the monitoring technology, which is an area that's near and dear to my heart. And on the next slide, please, Gabby. Want to just start off with a little bit of an analogy, and hopefully this makes you chuckle a little bit, but I really think that monitoring is like your beach umbrella. And here's why. So, and it's because people just cannot agree about monitoring, and there's a good reason for it. And so some of you might never consider going to the beach for a day without your beach umbrella. It just might be like something you never ever want to do. And other people have like never even thought about bringing an umbrella to the beach. And this is honestly the same way with monitoring in home hospital. It's nice to have, but you don't need it every day. And it keeps you safe from the sun. But if there is no sun, it ends up doing nothing, or worse, it actually like gets in your way. It's annoying. It blows away. You have to go chase after it. It hits someone. It knocks over someone's drink, etc. And it can really give you a headache. And so the other thing with it is that for it to work, you have to stay under it. You have to stay near to your umbrella. Otherwise, the sun burns you up. And so the last piece is, while you can usually predict when you need your umbrella, right? The sun's progressing, you know where you need to put it and so on. You can't always predict when you need your umbrella, because sometimes it gets cloudy and all of a sudden you actually don't need your umbrella at all. And so the reason I kind of bring up each of these points is because these are all decisions that we have to make about monitoring in home hospital. And the fact is we do not have the evidence base yet to teach us what the right answer is. And so that's why you see people make very different decisions about monitoring. We've had, home hospital programs around the world operating for decades without any sort of monitoring other than vital signs in the patient's home twice a day. And those folks have done well. But there are definitely different kinds of opportunities that monitoring opens up to us. And we just need to remember, like, do you need it? Is it helpful or harmful? And it's actually kind of hard to predict when it might be helpful or harmful. And so that makes monitoring a tricky area. But hopefully going to give you some principles to help you make the decision for your program, because there is not a right answer. I'm not going to say you got to have it or you shouldn't have it, because there's programs all across the country and the world that have approached this very differently, very effectively. So on the next slide, I want to get to kind of the human interface decision. And so this is all about, are you going to construct a passive human interface for your monitoring, or an active human interface? And so what I mean by that is, passive is where the patient is just hanging out in their chair. They don't need to do anything. They are comfortable, and all their data flows to you passively. Versus an active monitor is going to be one where maybe they need to interface with a tablet. Maybe they need to put on a blood pressure cuff and press a button. Or maybe they need to actually call someone and tell them what their vital signs are. All these things are kind of within the realm of possible. And you really need to kind of make a decision in your program. Do you want to go fully passive, where all that data just flows? Or are you okay with some active components to your monitoring? Or actually, is everything going to require activity on the part of the patient? I think in general, the more passive you can get, the more areas of Jared's compass you're going to tick off. Because you're going to be able to have monitoring work for somebody who has limited, if any, tech literacy. You're going to be able to optimize connectivity and the timeliness of the data, and it's really going to make for a more wholesome system. That said, it's hard sometimes to pull that off in passive. And the reason is on the next slide. It's because of spatial decisions. So all the way on the creme de la creme is what we call ambient monitoring. Ambient monitoring is where you literally don't have to touch the patient and you get the data you need. These are very next generation sensors right now. And honestly, there's not a lot of programs or services using them. They have important limitations, but I think we will see more and more ambient monitoring happening in home hospital and in patients' homes in general. And so in the middle, we have the wearable set of sensors. And I would say these and intermittent are the most common that you're going to see. This can be a single lead ECG. This can be something on the wrist as pictured here. And other sorts of wearables exist on the waist as well is pretty common. And so here, the benefit of a wearable monitor is that the data is usually quite good because it's right on the patient. But the downside is you need to be able to transmit the data. Some of those wearable monitors will transmit right from the actual machine right up to the cloud. They have their own LTE connection. Others need a hub in the home, maybe that tablet. And that's where you get to the question of, well, you got to stay under your umbrella. You have to stay close to your hub. And if you don't, you won't get any of the data. And that can be very troubling sometimes for wearables. And then finally, wearables can fall off. And so this is just yet another issue with them. Then you have that intermittent issue where, again, more of an active option here. And you need to put it on. You need to put the blood pressure cuff on. You need to press the button. You need to put the pulse oximeter on and transmit your heart rate and your SpO2, for example. And these are very much more spot checking and not necessarily continuous data flowing to you, but is certainly an option and is probably used by, I would almost say, a majority of home hospital programs across the country right now. But again, lots of great questions for how you're able to design kind of things within both the human interface and then the spatial decisions you may make. On the next slide, then we get to kind of the clinical decisions, which is probably the most important point. And inside clinical decisions, really need to tune your criteria to your monitoring capabilities. So what I mean by tuning your criteria is essentially deciding, how sick of a patient do I want to take home? And here's where, we can go back to the, original home hospital programs in Australia and Spain and elsewhere around the world that had absolutely no sensors, no monitoring, except for those 2 daily visits that a nurse might make. And so here you can take care of a nice broad spectrum of patients, right? But if you want to move to the next level, say maybe to a patient with AFib with RVR, you need a cardiac monitor for that patient. And you just can't take care of them effectively without it. And so here's where I think tuning your criteria to your monitoring capabilities is really important in deciding what you want as a program. And then finally, checking your response capabilities. How timely are you going to be able to respond to things? What's the training of the people who are responding? And then are you going to be able to have clinical decision-making remote or on-site? And then finally, figure out the right monitor for the right patient. Maybe not everybody needs a cardiac monitor, but some folks need a certain level of monitoring. And again, there's no right answer here, but it's for your program to decide on kind of what is right for the kinds of patients that you're going to take home. Jared, wanted to pass to you kind of for any commentary on this part.
Yeah, for sure. Both David and I love the concept and the futuristic thinking around monitoring. On any particular night, you might find both of us wearing about 5 different devices on us, much probably to our wife's chagrin. But we've done a lot of work in this space. And I think just a couple other additional thoughts. I think that was phenomenal. I think one is, of course, the goal with monitoring is to maximize the clinically actionable alerts while minimizing the false alarm burden. And the alarm burden is real. And I think, David kind of spoke to that. But we're in a phase where kind of the march of science, the march of innovation are going to continue to work to improve that, whether it's through AI and other, machine learning opportunities where really kind of human versus machine opportunities will really present themselves, and we can better think through, again, minimizing that false alarm burden and maximizing the clinical actionable alerts. And I think to David's point, while hospital at home programs around the country and the world have done a lot of work without tech to date, we now have a lot of new tech that's developed over the last few years that will also, I think, enable future opportunities and patient populations to really be opportune for this type of work and really, again, further push the home as a center of care. And then I think, lastly, I think it's important to recognize that, again, the accuracy to which these devices work runs the gamut, right? And so you're going to get devices that are very, very good in one particular area and not so good in others, or that are really good at all the particular vitals you might want, although I don't know if that exists yet. But we're very hopeful that it will soon. There's a lot of work in PPG and other technologies, in cuffless BP, that just came out of the UK, an opportunity there. So there's really a lot of great work being done, and we're, I think, very hopeful that we'll continue to get better transmission of vitals from our patients to our clinician team. So I'll leave it at that, David.
Great, thanks. We're going to move on to the electronic health record, which is often the big elephant in the room. Like, how do I get this thing to work for home hospital? Kind of looking at progress. So in Brigham, we embarrassingly started without an EHR. We started with a spreadsheet. We made our own Excel spreadsheet, a bunch of tabs, one for vitals, one for progress note, one for lab values. It was customized. In many ways, it was completely perfect, I'll be very honest. It was also completely disconnected from everything else, and that was hard. And so we eventually moved into an outpatient EHR, which was incredibly clunky, right? Because we're doing acute care, but we're using an outpatient EHR module. But it was connected, right? Lab values flowed, vitals flowed, consult notes, everything was in there. And then we moved finally to an inpatient EHR, much less clunky, nice and connected. And then on the next slide, a lot of the inpatient EHR tools. And so if you are using an EHR for your home hospital, please make sure you've got these things. And here's why you probably should use the inpatient EHR version for home hospital. First of all, it gives your program great visibility. You can see exactly who is in the beds of our Brigham Home Hospital program right now if you're in our EHR. If we have our own department, and it's very nice, you can see, just like a patient's up in our tower on the 14th floor, you can see who's in our home hospital virtual beds. And then pharmacy tools are incredible. Pharmacy safety checks. Our pharmacists are reviewing our meds just as though the patient were on the floor, as well as familiar drugs and doses are all programmed in. These are things you don't get in the outpatient setting, or you don't get with that Excel spreadsheet. And then nice familiar admission pathways, right? When that emergency medicine physician is admitting and they're going to admit to home hospital, if they just have to press admit home hospital instead of admit upstairs, it's so much easier for them. And that's the kind of pathway that you can have if you're inside of your inpatient EHR. You also get nice order sets that you can customize for home hospital. Remove things like DVT prophylaxis potentially, but keep the rest of your general medicine admission order set. And then consultations can flow just like they would in the inpatient setting, which we have found really nice using the inpatient EHR tools. And then finally, the whole encounter is all rolled up into just that acute exacerbation. And this is something that is really, really nice also that we found inside of inpatient tools. There are still some important things that you need to supplement though, because EHRs still have not wrapped their head completely around home hospital. I will say that there are several vendors either building or that have commercialized home hospital modules for their EHR, and you should take a look at them. You can also build your own, but we still see holes in what the EHR is able to provide. Jared's going to touch on more of that in a second, but essentially handoff, right? Handing off is really hard using traditional EHR tools. And so we have found the need to engage with cloud-based handoff software. Similarly, shared tasks, right? Our team is distributed around town. We're not all on the unit necessarily, together all the time. And so having a cloud-based shared task manager has been really, really helpful for us and to supplement our clinical care. And then finally, make sure that whenever you do supplement the EHR and whenever your EHR allows for mobile options, grab at them because it is so key. Most of your clinicians, you should not ask them to open up a computer in the patient's home. Everything should be on their phone and should be mobile ready as much as possible, which certainly EHRs are not there yet, but they're getting there. And a lot of them do have those modules built in right now. Jared, on to you for some EHR commentary and then tech ecosystems.
Yeah, I'd say not as much there. I think you covered some great concepts. I think just to reemphasize a couple things, certainly there are notable differences between the Mass General and the Brigham and Women's hospital at home models, although there's a lot of similarities at the same time. And one where we certainly agree wholeheartedly is some of the great opportunities that integrating into the EHR provides. We've both done that together because we share an Epic team that will build that for us. But we also have, jointly recognized the failings of, particular EHR opportunities. And so, we've had to use other different digital platforms to convey some of this core information across the team. And we found that so helpful, particularly around David's mobile comment. It's just so crucial. Again, this is such a different model of care, given that clinicians are always on the go. Having that at the ready access is crucial. So technology ecosystems. As we think about creating the functional ecosystem across these domains, let's examine the digital system architecture you'll want to consider building to enable all the pieces to work together seamlessly. As we do so, I'm reminded of a quote by the healthcare scholar and my former Dartmouth professor, Paul Batalden, who famously stated, "Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets." So you'll want to think very carefully about how you're designing this overall digital platform. First, let's take a look at some foundational themes to consider when building this tech system architecture. First of all, map out human versus tech, right? You'll really want to take the time to perform your process flow maps and really understand where it might be best to employ in-person retrieval of vitals, exam, etc., versus using technology to do so. Of course, every patient is not the same, and so it might be helpful to even employ a tiered approach to your program based on patient clinical risk profile and geography. We've done this at MGH, and it's provided much better insight and structure to our program. And to that point, some patients require nearly all in-person visits, while others are clearly safe for a mix of in-person and virtual visits over their episode of hospital at home care. And obviously, of course, you've got to be mindful of the CMS waiver requirements if those are the patient populations you're caring for. You'll also want to look through the lens of interest of patient safety as the paramount determinant. There's times when, it's possible, again, tech might be the right answer here to make care the most patient safe. However, that might not always be the case. And you'll also want to keep in mind the patient and clinician experience of care and also cost. Sometimes humans are more expensive, sometimes they're cheaper compared to tech. When evaluating tech options, you'll want to engage early with the hospital and system telemedicine, remote patient monitoring, and EHR leaders and groups. And again, to David's point, these might not always be available to you, but they often are for many health systems around the country. And as US healthcare becomes more digital, there will be increasingly strong forces to develop systemness, or kind of oneness within your system, across the digital care platform of an entire hospital or health system. So you'll want to look for synergies and shared learnings, but you'll also want to remember and point out, as you engage in those discussions, the uniqueness of acute care at home. You'll also want to recognize the level of market maturity between tech and hospital at home that we're currently in. Much of the tech we've discussed to date was not originally designed for acute care at home. I got to repeat that. Much of the tech we've discussed to date was not originally designed for acute care at home. But, of course, for the inpatient, the ICU, or outpatient care. Fortunately, this will change given the CMS announcement and other payers' movement in this space, including the announcement by Humana just yesterday that some of you might have seen. But in the meantime, some of the tech offerings won't be fully mature nor integrated. Further innovation will occur, and mergers and acquisitions as well to provide better overall products. But we're in 2021, and in this current tech environment, you'll need to understand the opportunities that exist now around the digital platform. There's currently you want to carefully evaluate integrated turnkey solutions versus a compilation of the best individual products versus something in between. And that'll take some time. Now let's assess specific areas of this architecture, knowing that the most simple and integrated structure could be the best at enabling a care team to deliver high quality care in a home. Communication. Minimizing telemedicine platforms is, of course, the goal. Clinician teams can get bogged down in the logistics of learning and using each platform, but it's also important to realize the diversity of communication needs might still require 2 or 3 vendors, especially if you're engaging in community paramedicine and these community paramedics are not part of your hospital system. Monitoring. Hardware. One device versus one device with peripherals. There are a number of vendors out there looking to assist you with remote patient monitoring. Once you've narrowed down the field, you'll want to look carefully at the system architecture of transmission, of data, and how this might seamlessly integrate with your digital platform. Software. In terms of architecture, it's important to realize that there is software that is specific to only certain hardware, often the same vendor. And alternatively, there is software that is agnostic to the hardware or device and simply acts as a further transmission pathway of vitals, arrhythmias, and falls data from the device to the clinical team. You'll want to think carefully about the balance of interests at stake and which is best for your program. Alert communication pathways. As part of the digital architecture and doing process maps regarding information transfer within your system, within your hospital at home program, it is crucial to understand how alerts for vital abnormalities, arrhythmias, and falls will reliably get conveyed to the right clinician immediately and in a way that will wake them from sleep if it is happening at night. For instance, many alerts are not naturally connected to a hospital's paging system. I'm not sure the last time an email woke you from sleep. The EHR, integration, integration, integration. Ideally, the EHR should serve as the central hub of all tech system infrastructure. This does take time, but should be prioritized. When not feasible, it's important for the team, the clinical team, to have as seamless as possible the information transfer experience across the digital platform. And lastly, logistics management. Given the time constraints, we haven't spent as much time delving into the tech side of logistics management today. However, as we think about the full digital architecture to support your hospital at home program, there are a few notable mentions. Scheduling. Initially, when programs are small, this is relatively easy to manage quickly with human brain power. However, as you grow and schedules and routes become more and more complicated, it's easy to see how we might hire tech to do this for us. There are current and emerging digital offerings aiming to improve efficiency in scheduling, and they're worth considering. Equipment management and loss. Unlike inpatient care, equipment in hospital home programs can easily be scattered across an entire city. Geo-tracking, geolocation technology to effectively manage and minimize equipment loss is another area to consider. David, additional thoughts?
Great, thanks, Jared. So basically on this, and I think what I want to drive home is that you really don't need mission control, right? This is mission control. You don't need this. It is far beyond any home hospital's requirements. But on the next slide, you should pick what you do want. And I do think that there are some kind of streamlined, almost built for home hospital systems that can help. There's many out there. You can check out the cms.gov page that lists several of them. And choose based, again, on the patients that you want to take care of, kind of what they'll need. And the basics that they'll need is a communication system, right? Video and telephone. The basics that they'll need are some kind of monitoring. Whether you decide to go to passive systems is great. And the basics that they'll need is a safe way to essentially be able to utilize that tech in their care. And so as long as you have those pieces, you should be ready to go. And so I would never let the tech hold you back. But I do think that there are, as Jared just laid out, a lot of really great ways to kind of streamline a bunch of those pieces under one hood, potentially, with one of these ecosystems. And you can feel free to piece it together yourselves. That's also how we started as well. And it certainly does work. And so really with that, I think we want to wrap up. We want a lot of time for questions, and we've got plenty of time now. I'll kind of pass it back to Bruce to help us with the questions and take us home.
Great, thanks for a brilliant presentation. We've gotten a lot of questions into the Q&A. Just at a high level, there are a number of questions that are asking basically sort of which product. And just to let folks know that we were going to try and steer away from endorsing or mentioning specific products. David and Jared were talking much more about functionality and approaches and conceptual ways to get thinking about incorporating tech into a hospital at home program. So just didn't want folks to think that we were not reading or trying to be responsive to those questions, but that's how we wanted to approach that. Let me start off with a question that came from, several questions came in on tech in the context of medication administration. Have either of you seen or been exposed to types of tech or approaches that tech take to help with the non-trivial issue of medication administration in hospital at home? So things like cues for patients to take pills, pill identification, confirmation that doses have been administered. Have you all seen types of approaches that might be useful? It's an issue that comes up quite a bit.
I can start with that. And so we have, and we've even deployed certain kind of almost remote home-based Pyxis systems, if you will, and have had different shades of success with them. To be honest with you, in our home hospital environment, we don't deploy any kind of fancy tech in that respect because medications change so fast, right? It's acute care. And, one day it's ceftriaxone, the next day it's transition to cefpodoxime. And you don't want to load up that system with too much of one drug if all of a sudden it's changing the very next day. And so we haven't found a big need for that kind of a system in our home hospital work. Some of our other work in rehab at home and others we have. But I think that technology is advancing pretty rapidly, and it may be that there will be a place for it in the future.
Great. Here's a question and I'm kind of a tech neophyte, so I loved hearing this presentation because I feel as ignorant as many. If you're developing a system and your system within a health system or a hospital, and leadership says, we're happy to give you access to people in our IT department to help you do this, what is the phenotype of that person you should ask to help you out? Is there sort of a subgroup, sub-person type of guy or gal who is the most helpful to sort of be that in-between person between you and the whole IT department to translate both ways? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And that's for either David or Jared. I don't, someone who speaks the language of and can help get things done.
Sure, I'll take a first stab. David wants to add in, but yeah, that's a great question. I think in our own experience at MGH, we've had a very wonderful experience engaging with these types of groups. And I think, to your point, Bruce, kind of what does that phenotypic person look like? Honestly, it's generally, we've had the most success with people that have had a lot of a breadth of experience. For instance, I'm thinking mostly about telemedicine in particular, but have had a breadth of experience across inpatient, outpatient, et cetera, that can then be open to your uniqueness of acute care at home. I'll be honest, most of them, when we first started initiating conversations with them, kind of had no idea about this construct. And, we helped them kind of bring them along to understand what, this is really hospital level care in the home. Once they're able, you want to find something, of course, that someone that's open to that kind of concept. But I think really the key is finding someone that has a real key breadth of experience across the inpatient and outpatient space. And actually also has a lot of work with a variety of vendors. Our team at MGH is just phenomenal. They've been doing such great work with us to explore this acute care at home space. And they've been a great partner because of that experience they've had and the knowledge they've been able to weigh in with us.
Are there certain kind of job description labels that go with that good person?
I'll say, I think somebody just chatted in like nurse informaticist. I think, when we started out, we didn't have a tech person assigned to kind of our home hospital program. And that's okay. You don't have to have that. But I do think either a physician or a nurse who is ensconced in either informatics or tech is a great place. And I don't have a perfect name for that person.
Okay. No, fair enough. No, I think you gave it enough descriptive features to help. So that's great. I
would say even actually with our group, the two individuals that have been most helpful are actually not clinicians. But again, they've had so much time in this space. They've been very, very useful and helpful. So
interesting. There were several questions in the area of, basically marrying tech and in person, and just wondering if you have any high-level thoughts on guidance about, say, how to have the best possible visit, say, when a nurse is in the home and a physician or advanced practice provider is remote, and how to maximize that touch and tech remote interaction to patients' benefits. There were a few questions in that area.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not something that most clinicians have trained to do, and it takes practice. So we do practice with it, and I think every team kind of has a different role. Some folks, for example, ask their nurse or paramedic colleague to grab data before that APP or physician gets on the video, and kind of report out like a quick summary, almost as if you're on rounds listening to your resident or PA or NP report to you as an attending. There's other folks who kind of accompany the nurse or paramedic while they are gathering the data at the same time. And so I think both ways work. Sometimes the former can be a little more efficient, but definitely practicing kind of that remote experience is such a big deal because it really, really changes the way the patient experiences the care. And if everyone's lined up, it's a big deal for the patient versus having, the doctor or the APP in the home can seem much more quote unquote normal for a patient. But if you've practiced it and if it's nice and seamless, I think it can work very well.
Great. That's really helpful too. David, you gave some guidance on this, but we had a few questions in the Q&A on, that notion of ensuring connectivity in the home so that when you get there, you minimize the incident rate of surprises where you get in, say, behind an iron curtain. Are there ways to do that in a geographic sense? Like, do you run around the city with your tablet? I mean, you may not know what happens until you actually get into an apartment or into a home, but does Verizon have heat maps of connectivity and things like that folks can look at?
Yeah, so they do have those heat maps. Our experience has been they're usually not accurate. And especially, like you said, Bruce, when you walk into that building and you're behind the brick wall, all of a sudden, there isn't great connectivity. And so we have done everything from, bike around town and go into lobbies and run up elevators and things like that, and look at how our tablets transmit. It is an important is an important thing to do. And it's also important to, be able to have some backups. We have experimented with signal boosters in different settings in order to continue to care for a patient.
Any thoughts? This was another theme that came through in a few questions, and it's not an easy one, but I love you guys, and you always hurt the ones you love. Any thoughts on the intersection between tech and social determinants of health? Right now, I mean, a lot of the early work in hospital at home has been on tech in the construct of physiology and vital signs and diagnostics, but I'm just wondering if either of you have had any thoughts about how tech can play a role in addressing social determinants, if at all. And if you haven't thought about it, feel free to punt.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a very important topic at Mass General Brigham recently. And I think, I think actually acute care at home has a nice benefit in that you are actually going into the home, right? And so that's a really huge opportunity because you can actually deliver tech, you can pick up tech much more smoothly than you might be able to in other aspects of care delivery. And as a result, when we thought about kind of, equity across our program, particularly as we think about, RPM, you obviously have to bring that device regardless, but the companies are usually pretty good about managing, lack of Wi-Fi, whatever, right? They have transmission boxes, et cetera. So those, I think we worry a little bit less about, but it's often, in our telemedicine opportunities. And so we've actually gone to a model where we have a mix of Wi-Fi and LTE-enabled tablets, and those tablets, are brought into the home, and we've moved to a model where every single patient has one of those, ideally in their home. And again, when there's an equity issue, we just use our LTE-enabled iPads, right? And we've had a good experience with this. I think just to Verizon's point earlier, we weren't commenting necessarily specifically about Verizon in terms of the heat maps, but there are challenges there. But certainly, we've had a pretty good experience to date on the equity piece. I think because we've recognized it and we've realized the advantages that acute care at home has.
Great, thanks, Jared. I think we need to call the question period to a close and start to close off, bring the webinar to a close. I just want to thank Jared and David for a really thoughtful presentation that I think really integrated a whole lot in the way of conceptual frameworks and conceptual approaches, as well as a lot of practical advice. Appreciate the great questions that came in through the Q&A and the chat. Just wanted to let all of you know, as we opened up the webinar, we noted these two sites where a lot of the hospital at home technical assistance is being collected and posted. We've been in something of a sprint since the waiver was launched to bring this program up to speed. You'll notice that the Hospital at Home User Group Technical Assistance Center is currently being hosted on the CAPC, the Center to Advance Palliative Care website. That's our current beta version, but you'll find a lot of great stuff there. And I think you saw we had this slide at the beginning, but just to let you know that there will be a webinar next week, the week after, and the following week. The webinars that have been completed, those recordings are on the event site at hospitalathomeusersgroup.org or the TA Center. And we invite all of you to go on and register for those webinars, and we'll see you there at future webinars. And we thank you for joining the webinar today. There will be a link in the chat for a survey to quickly evaluate the webinar. We would love to have you fill that out. We really, since we're just starting out in this venture, we would love to have your feedback. Feel free to whack us across the head if needed, or compliment what we've done. Appreciate that so much. And next webinar next week at 4 to 5 p.m. on efficient, effective, excellent issues in hospital at home logistics and operations, an issue that all programs work on and sometimes struggle with. So we hope to see you there.